is not likely to win. So it's a tricky one here, honestly. I'm trying to reach Sanford and Jimmy, but I'm not able to. Kema, are you trying as well?
Oh yeah, trying to reach Dr. Sanford.
I can't get through. Let me call Jimmy. Well, how are you, Edwin? It's been quite hectic down here. How's it been for you, Jimmy?
Sorry?
I said, how has it been for you? How has everything been for you, work-wise? Can you hear me?
It's great here, but affected by COVID, by lockdown.
Okay, so things are
in the past, I think in the past 2 months, since May 1st, Beijing was locked down since then, and then just reopened last week. Hopefully something will get right, but not sure at this stage. There are still some cases each day.
All right. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
You have 4 more minutes.
Yeah.
Just trying to get.
So let's wait for another 5 minutes. Wait for Sanford and other audiences to join. Will Camille join this webinar or not? Maybe not.
I'm not sure she's able to join.
Okay, but she is back to Nigeria, right?
If she is.
Okay. When I talked with our colleagues in UK and in Europe, they just came back from our Dentist Global Partner meeting in Mexico, but most of them caught COVID after that trip.
Oh my God! Really?
Yeah, it's true.
Did you not attend? Did you not?
No. But the partners in the US and then in the Paris office and in London office, I think 5. I talked with 7 or 8 partners. I think 5 of them caught COVID.
Wow.
Tested. They tested, but they were told that they caught COVID. So it's
so it's still very
but I think it's okay for them.
Yeah, it's still very much out there. Oh wow. Shocking. Okay, so Kema, are you with us? It's almost time.
Yes, I'm on the phone with Sanford. He's trying to locate the link. Edwin, can you resend the link to Sanford?
Okay. I've resent the link invitation to Jimmy and Sanford.
Okay.
Yeah, Sanford is here.
Okay, thank you.
Everyone,
Perfect.
apologies, please. Apologies.
No, it's your own time.
Thank you.
Hi, Jimmy.
Good morning, Edwin.
Good morning.
Recording in progress.
Okay, I will turn on the video function. Jimmy and Sanford, I turn on the video function for both of you, so you can try to share a video if yeah, great.
Right, thank you. I'll just be a moment.
Sure,
Thank you.
no problem. Okay, shall we start? Amolola?
Yes, we can go.
This webinar, I think this is the second webinar that Dennis is organizing May 17, the same time. This is the second one, and the first one we introduced the foreign investment regime in Nigeria, and in the second one we are discussing the mining and the renewables and PPP in Nigeria. And we thank you for our colleagues from Nigeria to prepare a wonderful and a thoughtful and a detailed presentation on the three topics we are going to touch in this webinar. We also thank you the chamber and the embassy for the assistance to join in this, to have more Chinese companies to join in this webinar. So I just turn over to my colleagues, Omolola. So our first one is about the mining.
Thank you very much, Edwin, and thank you all for being able to make it today to listen to us speak. My name is Omolola Koka, a partner in the energy and project finance of Denton's Acres Law. So as Edwin mentioned, I will be speaking to mining in Nigeria with specific focus on the legal framework for the mining sector in Nigeria. So the outline of my discussion is going to cover market opportunity, national policy, legal and regulatory framework, fiscal incentives, the challenges within the industry, the funding opportunities, and the growth opportunities for mining sector. So for the market opportunity, there are 7 main target minerals that the government has expressed interest in developing wider. I mean, this is also because of the government's drive to diversify from oil and gas. So currently, Nigeria has over 44 mineral deposits in almost over 500 locations across the country, which are mostly largely unexploited. So with its intention to diversify the economy, some programs have been put in place by the government, such as the Solid Minerals and Development Fund, where the FG has, promised to invest over $500 million to unlock about a 1.5 billion in third-party investments. So, which is quite interesting, you would say. So, the 7 areas of interest are the bitumen, which Nigeria is believed to have a total reserve of about 42.74 billion metric tons of. And with the rate of growth and urbanization in Nigeria, the expectation is that there will be a high demand for bitumen for road construction because, as I'm sure some of you are aware, there are quite a number of infrastructure programs that Nigeria is currently undergoing. So the other one is gold, and gold has been quite interesting lately. Currently, there's a program, an initiative of the government, which is the Presidential Artisanal Gold Mining Development Initiative, which is aimed at integrating artisanal and small-scale gold mining activities in Nigeria. And as part of this initiative, the Central Bank of Nigeria, will be buying locally produced gold to boost profitability in terms of artisanal miners in Nigeria. Now we have coal. I mean, with the era of renewable energy, you would think that coal is something that Nigeria would have to not focus too much on. But to be quite honest, right now Nigeria has nearly 3 billion tons of indicated reserves in about 17 identified coal fields. So it's as low sulfur, is great for the environment, and it's very useful for power generation in Nigeria. Then we have barite. The global barite market is valued at about 1.4 billion. Nigeria intends to be one of the major suppliers of this mineral, and importation right now is banned. So we have the limestone. Nigeria is blessed with rich deposits of limestone, and it's expected that in the next 5 years, the world markets for limestone will grow. And the expectation is that Nigeria, is expecting that more investments will come in relation to that. And then we have the iron ore. I think I would not belabor too much on each of these, but these are iron ore and lead zinc are the areas that the target minerals that the government are looking to exploit and to get more investment from foreigners. Then what policies do we have that have been put in place by what policies do we have that has been put in place for the mining sector? So we have the Economic Sustainability Plan, which is also called the Stimulus Package. So under the plan, the federal government has allocated about $15 billion, which is to support artisanal and small-scale miners. And then we have the National Integrated Minerals Exploration Program, which is designed to rapidly generate bankable geoscientific data with the aim of de-risking the sector and attracting high-caliber investments. As I mentioned earlier, we have the Presidential Artisanal Gold Mining as one of the initiatives. Then we have the Nigeria Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, which is part of the national initiative to promote the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. And this is to promote transparency and accountability in the management of Nigeria's oil, gas, and mining revenues. Then we have the data retrieval policy. One of the major challenges with the Nigerian mining sector is the lack of data, geoscientific data. So the federal government has commenced the process of retrieving geological data with respect to, in order to build a national electronic geodata archiving system in Nigeria. So those are the, just a few of the national policies. So the next slide, which is the legal framework for mining in Nigeria. The 1999 Constitution is the ground norm of the country, and under the Constitution, all minerals, natural gas, everything upon the land in Nigeria and upon the territorial waters and the exclusive zone of Nigeria they're all under the authority of the states. That's the federal government of Nigeria. And then for any investor wishing to come into Nigeria, we have the Companies and Allied Matters Act, which is basically to deal with the incorporation of companies in Nigeria. So for an investor to conduct business in Nigeria, it is required to at least establish a local subsidiary for it to be able to operate within the system. Then we have the main law that guides the mining sector. That's the Nigerian Minerals and Mining Act. It vests control of all properties and minerals in the state and prohibits unauthorized exploration or exploitation of minerals in Nigeria. Then we have the Nigerian Minerals and Mining Regulations, which provides guidelines on how mining operations should be conducted, including requirement for obtaining mineral titles, and provides for penalties and sanctions for defaulters. So it is expected that any investor coming into the country, and who wishes to engage in mining in Nigeria must first obtain the necessary mineral titles for it to be able to operate under Nigerian law. Then we have the Land Use Act, which is solely vests all land in the federal government, and the government exercises authority over land that is used in all aspects or in all operations in Nigeria. Then we also have to be very mindful that for every project that is to be undertaken in Nigeria, there's a requirement under the Environmental Impact Assessment Act that mandates that any proposed project or activity must first be evaluated to consider the environmental effects of such project before commencement of the activity, and to propose appropriate remedial actions. We also have the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, which encourages and promotes investment in the Nigerian economy, as well as the Nigerian Environmental Standard Regulation and Enforcement Agency. It is a body that is established to provide adequate regulations and sanctions in relation to the protection of the environment. So the next slide, regulatory framework. So it's important to understand that to engage in the mining sector, there are agencies that any prospective operator must report to. So we have the Ministry of Mines and Steel, and this ministry is primarily saddled with the responsibility of monitoring and supervising the solid mineral sectors of the country. Under the Ministry of Mines and Steels, it operates through the Mining Cadastral Office. It also operates through the Mining Inspectorate Department, Mines, Environment and Compliance, as well as the Artisanal and Small Scale Department, all within the Mines and Steel Development Agency. Then we have the Nigerian Steel Raw Materials Exploration. Before I move on, so with the Mining Cadastral Office, it is the agency responsible for issuing, managing, and administering mineral titles, listings, licenses, and permits within the sector. So, for any operator to operate within the Nigerian industry, mining industry, it would require to make the necessary application to the Mining Cadastral Office. Then we have the Nigerian Steel Raw Materials Exploration Agency. So this is a geoscientific information center that is for investors and researchers in the solid mineral sector with a mandate. So this agency has a mandate, among others, to carry out exploration of raw materials in all parts of Nigeria and elsewhere for the iron and steel industry. So it is important that, for any investor wishing to come into Nigeria, this would be your first port of contact in terms of understanding the data that we have available and the possibilities in terms of mining. Then we have different mining titles. As I mentioned before, we have the exploration license, which is typically granted for a 3-year period and can be renewed for 2 subsequent terms of 2 years. So this grants the right to carry out exploration activities in an area that is not exceeding 200 kilometers squared. And then we have the mining list, which is granted for a period of 25 years and can be renewed, further renewed. It grants the right to occupy and carry out mineral exploration within a lease area of 50 kilometers squared. We have the small scale mining lease granted for a 5-year period and also renewable by another 5 years. And this is typically granted to carry out artisanal, alluvial, and other forms of mining operations, which involves the use of low technology. And the mining area is not expected to exceed 3 kilometers squared. Then we have the reconnaissance permit, which is granted for a 1-year period and subsequent one renewable by another 1 year. And this grants a non-exclusive right to enter on and fly over any land in Nigeria to conduct reconnaissance activities. Holders of this permit are permitted to remove surface samples in small quantities, but they're not permitted to engage in any surface drilling. The area covered is actually not limited, so it's quite a wide area for reconnaissance activity. And then we have the query lease, which is granted for 5 years. And then we have, I don't want to go too much into that, and we have what we call the water use permit. And the water use permit is actually granted to holders of exploration licenses, mining licenses, query licenses, small scale mining license, and it's actually granted for the duration of the original lease. Then we have the Nigerian Customs, which is an agency that supervises, has an oversight over the Federal Ministry of Finance and National Planning. And it has the responsibility of collection of customs revenue, such as imports, exports. I've mentioned the Corporate Affairs Commission. This is the body that oversees the regulation and formation of companies in Nigeria. We also have the Federal Inland Revenue that collects taxes in relation to all operations in Nigeria. Can we move on to fiscal incentives? So the fiscal incentives, there's exemption from custom and excise duties. So plants, machinery, and equipment brought into the country for the purpose of facilitating mining operations are exempted from customs and import duties on a continuing basis. Then there's a 5-year tax holiday. All companies that engage in mining operations are entitled, to take advantage of this 5-year program. It can be for an initial 3 years under the pioneer tax status incentive, and which can also be further extended to 2 years. Then we have investment allowance and allowable deductions, as well as an unrestricted access to retention and use of earned foreign exchange and free transferability of foreign exchange. So meaning that local and foreign entities are guaranteed access to use and transfer their forex, any foreign exchange earnings in a freely convertible currencies of their choosing. And such investors are free from fear of expropriation of their investments and assets in Nigeria by the Nigerian government. Then we have tax deductible reserve for environmental protection, mine rehabilitation, and reclamation mine closure, meaning that foreigners can only own Nigerian mines, which is unlike in other African countries. And tax deductibility will apply to all steps and actions taken in relation to environmental protection and rehabilitation. Next slide. So the challenges that we have in the industry is not unusual. So we do have a case of illegal mining. The government is said to be deprived of a huge amount of revenue. But most of the perpetrators for this illegal mining are informal artisanal miners who obviously cannot afford the high cost of obtaining increased necessary permits and approvals to mine legally. So the governments have taken steps to encourage more artisanal miners so that it will discourage illegal mining. You find that most of our gold are actually illegally mined and then sold in other countries. So the government has put in place incentives and programs to encourage artisanal miners and to make it easier for them to access and be able to operate within the industry. Then other points I mentioned earlier, which is insufficient geological data. The data available within the sector is outdated, and this clearly poses a lot of challenges for sector participants. So right now, the government is, trying to, like as I mentioned earlier, the Nigerian what's it called now? The raw agency, raw material agency are, clearly putting in place opportunities and to ensure that we gather enough data for prospective investors and to update such data on a regular basis. And then we also have inadequate infrastructure and basic amenities. And this has clearly added to the problems that Nigeria is facing. So the government is looking at ways in partnering with private entities to provide adequate infrastructure required to support the mining value chain in Nigeria. So what are the funding opportunities? So we have strategic partnership financing. This is actually the most common of the funding arrangements in Nigeria. You find that a lot of investors come in and invest in existing businesses. They can either invest in debt and equity, so it could be a combination of both debt and equity, and they bring in capital, whether by way of equity or loan, as I said. And an example of that would be, I don't know if you know, Segilola, which is considered the largest commercial scale gold mining operation in Nigeria, recently entered into some joint ventures with different businesses, one of which we also advised on, with the support of the Africa Finance Corporation. Segilola has been able to produce gold in the last few months, and it is operating at a large scale. And also the government has encouraged private persons to collaborate with it through PPPs, which my colleagues will speak about, concession, and as well as availability of project financing. Although there are not a lot of project financing, but the expectation is with the expansion of the sector, more and more project financing opportunities will arise. And then the growth projections for the mining sector is that, despite the fact that the sector has seen a decrease in terms of its contribution to Nigeria's GDP, the expectation is that the steady growth would encourage more investment. And as I mentioned earlier, Segilola Gold Project is considered to be the first commercial large-scale gold project in Nigeria backed by the AFC. And then we have companies such as Ariella Mining Limited, which is a UK company who has declared their intention to invest over $100 million in gold mining in Nigeria. So clearly, Nigeria, has a lot to offer. It has a large reserve of minerals, and the expectation is with the enabling environment and the policies and incentives that the government have put in place, that more and more to attract investors. The expectation is more investments will be, will come into the country. And I believe I can stop here. If you have any questions after this, I believe the entire presentation, we can take those questions later. So over to you, Edwin.
Yeah, thank you, Omolola, for your detailed explanation of the mining sector. Okay, now I think it's Chinato. So over to you, renewables.
Thank you so much, Edwin. Great presentation, Omolola. My name is Chinedu Kema. I'm a partner in the Energy and Project Finance Department of Denton Seekers Law. I'll be discussing the legal aspects of renewable energy in Nigeria. In terms of the outline, I'll talk about the market opportunity, the renewable energy targets in Nigeria for the federal government, the legal framework, the incentives that the government has put in place, the funding sources, and I'll sort of conclude by exploring a case study, a recent transaction we advised on in the renewable energy space. In terms of market opportunities, and these are some of the numbers that show that there's a massive market for energy access in Nigeria. For example, 85 million Nigerians are without grid electricity. That's approximately 43% of our population. And obviously, Nigeria is one of the largest energy asset deficit countries in the world. So that shows that there are a lot of opportunities for renewable energy companies to come into the space and provide power and energy to Nigerians. It's estimated that there's an annual economic loss of 26.2 billion USD. Again, that's a massive leakage for Nigeria, but opportunity for businesses to come into the market. This is sort of like a map of Nigeria that shows what the government is looking at. And if you look at the green, you see that there are a lot of requirements for standalone systems. There's also a massive requirement for mini grids in Nigeria. And all this will really be pushed by renewable energy. And the government is really willing to welcome renewable energy companies into the Nigerian market, because obviously, because of funding deficits, the government cannot meet or close the energy access gap in Nigeria. So a lot of private companies are being encouraged to come into the market, both local companies and foreign companies. For example, the International Energy Agency said that to achieve universal access in Nigeria, definitely the government needs to step up the provision of energy using off-grid solutions. And that's what both the federal government and state governments are trying to do in Nigeria. In terms of the renewable energy target in Nigeria, the government is looking at generating 30% of on-grid electricity from renewable energy. That's 12 gigawatts of additional large hydro, 3.5 gigawatts of small hydro, 6.5 gigawatts of solar PV, and 3.2 gigawatts of wind. Again, massive market opportunities for participants. From an off-grid renewable energy perspective, the government is looking to add 13 gigawatts of off-grid renewable energy to the sector. Obviously, you cannot talk about renewable energy without talking about energy efficiency, and the government is looking to reduce the energy intensity across all sectors by 2.5% per year. For biofuels, the government obviously through the NNPC is looking to blend fuel ethanol with gasoline, and they really want to work with partners. There's a biofuels policy in Nigeria, and I'll talk about that as we go on. And the government is also looking to blend up to 20% biodiesel with petroleum diesel. Again, massive opportunity for companies to run into the market and provide those services. And there are certain projects that the government is looking to push. For example, cassava fuel ethanol plants. They are looking to partner with companies with the right technology, the right funding sources to sort of push those projects in Nigeria. So that's a brief overview of the renewable energy targets in Nigeria and the market opportunities available to participants. In Nigeria, we have the Rural Electrification Agency, and it's always necessary to talk about the projects that the government has already developed on ground to see that the government is actually very serious about pushing renewable energy. From a mini grid perspective, the government has achieved more than 6,000 connections as at April 2022. For solar home system, more than 480,000 connections, and the government has also connected enterprises for businesses through solar home systems, more than 3,000. For gender mainstreaming, because gender mainstreaming is important to the renewable energy space, more than 4,000 households headed by women have also been connected. And from an energy installed through mini grids, we have up to 960 kilowatts. And from an energy deployed by solar home systems, we have more than 15,000 kilowatts. Again, it shows that the government, in addition to pushing policy, in addition to pushing legal framework, the government is also investing massively into the renewable energy sector in Nigeria to sort of encourage, to de-risk the sector, to sort of encourage companies to come into the sector. The government brings in money, the private individuals brings in money, foreign and local investors brings in money, and obviously push that sector. From a policy, legal, and regulatory framework, the most important law in Nigeria when you talk about renewable energy is the Electric Power Sector Reform Act. The Electric Power Sector Reform Act creates the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. It's the regulatory agency in charge of the power sector in Nigeria, and it talks about issues of licenses. For certain projects in the renewable energy space, you need to get a license from the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. And the Electric Power Sector Reform Act also created the Rural Electrification Agency. The Rural Electrification Agency is sort of in charge of provision of off-grid solutions to communities that are underserved or unserved. And another important act in the renewable energy space is the Energy Commission of Nigeria. It creates the Energy Commission that is responsible for overall energy sector planning and policy implementation. This is an important agency in the Nigerian renewable energy space. And from a policy perspective, we have the National Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Policy. The government plans on developing the renewable energy sectors are all laid out in that policy. It talks about fiscal incentives that are provided to market participants, also talks about different renewable energy targets that the government has, obviously. And what the government did is, in addition to providing the policy, the government also created an action plan for each step of the way to show how the government plans to achieve the policy statements that's contained in the National Renewable Energy Action Plan. It's from 2015 to 2030, and there's also an action plan for energy efficiency, also the National Energy Efficiency Action Plan 2015 to 2030. From a rural electrification perspective, because what the government did was to divide the market into different phases. You have the on-grid space, then you have the rural electrification space. And for the rural electrification space, the Rural Electrification Agency is in charge of the implementation of the rural electrification strategy and implementation plan. And you have the World Bank, the AFDB, the AFC. They are all funding projects in rural electrification based on the rural electrification strategy and implementation plan. And from many grids perspective, obviously, we're talking about the decentralization of the electricity grid, and the government, in order to decentralize the grid, has also introduced different regulations. We have the mini grid regulations, that it's one of the best mini grid regulations in the world, because it makes developing mini grid projects in Nigeria straightforward, seamless, or based or electronically based. For you to develop a mini grid project in Nigeria, for example, you need a permit, and it's the process of obtaining the permit. It's quite straightforward, pretty fast, and the documents you need are all laid down in the mini grid regulations. And the government also introduced the feed-in tariff in Nigeria. Feed-in tariff to sort of encourage solar projects, wind projects, biomass projects in the country. It's always important when you talk about renewable energy in Nigeria to also talk about the oil and gas sector. Obviously, we know Nigeria's history with oil and gas, and recently the government passed the Petroleum Industry Act, and there are a couple of renewable energy provisions in that act that are of importance. Number one, the government is looking to NNPC to engage in development of renewable energy projects. And what the government is thinking of the situation where the NNPC partners with companies, foreign investors to push those projects, especially biofuels projects. And the Petroleum Industry Act talks about biofuels and hydrogen. And what it sort of did is to place biofuels development within the ambit of the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority. So for investors looking at that space, there are clear regulatory requirements. There's a clear framework, because one of the major issues that investors had in that space was a clear legal and regulatory framework for developing those projects. And by using the means of the Petroleum Industry Act, the government sort of provided a clear framework for investors to look at, partner with the NNPC, and obviously look to develop those projects. And interestingly, hydrogen, obviously, and given the topic of energy transition, you cannot talk about renewable energy transition without also touching on hydrogen. And the government, in order to tap into that massive industry, also included certain provisions in the Petroleum Industry Act that speaks to hydrogen, meaning for investors looking to push hydrogen projects including green hydrogen project. You have a regulatory agency that has the regulatory power over those projects, and you can obviously, you have a law that guides the development of such projects, and that provides that framework, gives that comfort that there's a clear legal and regulatory framework for hydrogen projects. And I wanted to mention the Climate Change Act. Recently, as of the last quarter of 2021, the government enacted the Climate Change Act. Obviously, that's a massive development for Nigeria, and again, creates massive opportunities for renewable energy companies, because the government is looking to reduce the energy intensity of sectors. And one of the ways the government is looking to do that is to encourage companies to develop renewable energy projects, both on-grid and off-grid, and also develop projects to, for example, take over the place of diesel, take over the place of petroleum products in Nigeria. And the Nigerian Biofuels Policy and Incentives 27 also speaks to biofuel policies. And what the government is looking to do using the policy is to create a fund. For example, the government is looking to create a 100 billion naira fund to push biofuels projects in Nigeria. Obviously, the NNPC will be in charge of that fund. But it's a 2007 policy. There's a question about whether the government is serious about it, because since 2007, the government has not sort of implemented it. But obviously, with the enactment of the Petroleum Industry Act, the creation of a new regulatory agency in charge of biofuels projects, there's the hope that at some point the government will resurrect that particular policy and implement it. From a fiscal incentives perspective, and I will speak about that, there are different fiscal incentives aimed at encouraging participants in the sector. And there's the pioneer status, there's the VAT exemption, there's the import duty exemption. For companies that look into research and development, there's also a research and development allowance to encourage those companies. And all these are provided under different laws in Nigeria, and I will speak to them as I progress. So I sort of found it interesting to talk about a proposed bill currently before the National Assembly, that's the Federal Parliament in Nigeria, and the bill has copious provisions on renewable energy. Obviously, at some point, the aim is that the government will pass this bill to further deepen the renewable energy markets. Some of the key provisions in the bill that are aimed at encouraging renewable energy development, and NEC, that as the regulator, has an express duty to promote projects aimed at developing and utilizing renewable energy, and also ensure gender mainstreaming in the power sector. And there's also a mandatory renewable generation obligation that will be placed on companies, generation companies. There's also the bill aims to introduce a renewable purchase obligations on the distribution companies and some power consumers. Renewable energy projects will be given priority access to the transmission and distribution system, which is important. And currently, the government is working with Siemens to develop the transmission and distribution system in Nigeria to improve it. Obviously, over the past few months, we've had issues of grid collapse in Nigeria, and with the Siemens project, which is in association with the German Republic, obviously, the government will further improve the transmission system and distribution system. So the priority access granted to renewable energy projects in Nigeria is actually a great one. And there's feed-in tariffs. Obviously, currently there's feed-in tariff. The government is also looking to maintain the feed-in tariffs for qualifying projects. And the regulator would at some point develop standard PPAs, obviously for certainty in the market. And those PPAs will be aimed to make the terms of contracting clear for all parties looking to transact in the sector. And there will obviously be local content support. And for companies coming into Nigeria, one of the key issues is local content support. You need to drive local content by utilizing Nigerian goods, Nigerian services as much as possible. So the proposed Electricity Bill 2021 has mandatory provisions on supporting local content. And there's also the bill aims to create a market for trading of renewable energy certificates. Currently, there's no legal or regulatory framework for trading and renewable energy certificates. So the bill is looking to create that market. And that's a massive market on its own, because obviously you have different players, different market participants trading, buying and trading, generating renewable energy certificates. And the bill finally looks to create a rural electrification and renewable energy agency. Now, interestingly, that would be a dedicated regulator or a dedicated agency looking to push renewable energy, which is with the dedicated regulator. That means it's really a focus on that sector and to push that sector and obviously provide workable policies, provide workable regulations, provide workable rules that are streamlined, aimed at renewable energy market participants and the sector. And one of the functions of that regulator will be to advocate for carbon tax. And the essence is to disincentivize the sale of fossil fuels and trigger energy transition. Obviously, that's good for renewable energy market players. And that regulator, when created, network individuals, your pension funds, and in certain cases, foreign investors coming to the market to buy those commercial papers. And we've seen crowdfunding, and I know of a company that to finance their project, they went into crowdfunding from Germany and they raised sufficient funds for their project. And in order to tap into the crowdfunding space, the Securities and Exchange Commission in Nigeria introduced a crowdfunding regulation to guide crowdfunding in Nigeria. And there's an interesting funding source, the sale of carbon credits. And you see a company in Nigeria recently sold carbon credits it generated from its renewable energy projects. And that's a massive source of funding, really. And there are certain structures where, based on carbon credits you generate in the future, you get funding for those projects. And there's a company in Nigeria that's done that. Like I mentioned, I'd like to sort of briefly look at a case study. This is a project we advised on. It's an on-site renewable energy project for an industrial client. The size of the project, they were looking at between 100 kW up to 5 megawatts. And I should mention about the size of the project. For between less than 1 megawatt, you don't need a license from NEC. NEC is the regulator. But for up more than 1 megawatt and above, then you have to get what we call an off-grid electricity generation license from NEC. The process of getting that license can be tedious. So most project participants, you see them reduce the capacity. Obviously, depends on the load requirements of the company we're talking about, but you see them reduce their capacity to 1 megawatt and below. And there's a policy called the eligible customer policy that allows generators to sell power to industrial clients. For some certain clients, you see them, they develop a project at one site, probably more than 5 megawatts up to 10 megawatts, and using that site, they sell power to different customers, different industrial clients, different commercial clients. So that's another structure that project developers can use. The system we advised on was a PV system or hybrid. There was a was a PV, there was a storage, and there was a diesel system. Obviously, if from the PV you generate, you store, and then if there's an issue, you use your diesel generator to as a safe option. From a documentation perspective, we've looked at a PPA. The PPA term was between 10 to 20 years, obviously depending on the credit risk of the client. Again, under the PPA, the customer had the option of buying the project, obviously based on certain determined ratios or formula. And we had an EPC contract and an O&M contract. And what the project developer did is to utilize the services of local entities. You know, I'd mentioned that in certain cases where you obtain Naira loan from local commercial banks, you have a currency mismatch. But by utilizing local entities, you pay in Naira. And obviously that's a way of addressing or mitigating your foreign exchange risk under the APC contract and the O&M contract. And there was a lease agreement. The lease agreement obviously talks about where you, your access to the land to site your plant. So there was a lease agreement between the client and the owner of the land. From a funding source, what we saw was there was a combination of a shareholder loan. There was a shareholder loan under the shareholder loan agreement. And there's a way you structure the shareholder loan to save on tax. You have reduced withholding tax on the interest element you have to pay on the shareholder loan. And given the fact that it's a shareholder loan, we can pay for a long tenure. And we also had a bank loan, a local currency loan. And obviously the issue of currency mismatch was a key one for the client. And in order to address that, was the client utilized the services of EPC, local EPC contractors, and local O&M contractors. But one of the key issues for the Nigerian government is to improve the energy mix. You cannot talk about improving the energy mix in Nigeria without renewable energy. And the government is taking conscious efforts to grow the renewable energy sector, because the government has realized that for Nigerians to have access to electricity, both households, businesses, commercial, industrial, there needs to be a concerted effort. So in addition to providing grid electricity using gas, there needs to be concerted effort to provide grid electricity using renewable energy, to provide off-grid solutions using a renewable energy. And in Nigeria, we have a lot of renewable energy sources. We have solar, sun, obviously, wind, we have offshore wind in Nigeria, we have geothermal in certain states in Nigeria. So it's really a massive sector looking for investors to take strategic positions given the plan of the government to introduce policies and laws to grow that sector. I think that's I'm happy to take questions after the presentation. I'll hand over to my colleagues, Sanford and Olujimi. Thank you.
Okay, Sanford.
Thank you. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you, Chinedu and Omolola, for the very insightful presentation. Okay, so one moment, please. I need to share my screen. Okay, please just let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see. It's working.
Okay, I just need to enlarge it. Uh-oh. Apologies.
Just press F11.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but I just need to enlarge the screen. One moment. Okay, great. Thanks again. So, I mean, in the next couple of minutes, I'll just speak to the opportunities that exist, and I'll be speaking to the to public-private participation in investments in Nigeria. This is such an interesting area, quite wide and diverse, because a good number of the investment that we see, especially from China, comes in the form of private public participatory investment. I recall that it was in April in a conference that held in Beijing, where the issue of the Belt and Road Initiative came up. And then, the conversation centered around how we could have, we could fund PPP in African states that already are subject to infrastructural deficiencies. And again, the opportunities, a lot of opportunities arise in that area, which can really be taken advantage of. So to that extent, it's an overview. We're going to be, in the next couple of minutes, we'll be looking at the true situation of infrastructure in Nigeria at the moment, the deficiencies that exist, and the opportunities. We'll slightly touch on the national policy on PPP, which currently exists, that was provided by the ICRC, which is the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission. We'll look at briefly financing of PPP, and then how disputes that arise in relation to PPPs may be resolved. I will just say that most of what will be spoken about here will be tidbits. Again, the focus here is on the national. Of course, Nigeria has 36 states. Lagos State is the commercial hub of the country. It's got its own set of regulations for public-private participation. In terms of the state, I believe it's a trailblazer in that regard. We haven't dealt with those in these slides, again, because of the time constraints and all of that. We're very happy to discuss in detail, because again, we do a lot of work in that space also. So I will just go into the presentation, right? As of today, what we know is that in terms of road infrastructure, Nigeria has a 70% deficit. Fairly recently, the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari, gave a presentation where he mentioned clearly that as of for the next 10 years or thereabout, Nigeria would require about $1.5 trillion US investment in infrastructure to bridge the deficit that already exists. Again, as of today, Nigeria spends less than 1% of its GDP on infrastructure projects, right? A number of areas, a number of sectors, this deficit is evident in a number of sectors. So for instance, in terms of roads and rail infrastructure, power generation, again, as Kema had talked about, even in renewable energy, we see a lot of deficiency. And I think Chinedu also mentioned how that in the last couple of weeks, we've had the collapse of the national grid for more than 2 or 3 times, right? Which is quite unfortunate. In the public education space, health, airports, I know that as of today, there are talks about concessioning those airports. That is also another form of PPP, as we'll see in the course of this presentation, right? Urban transport systems. So in terms of assessment, it's very easy to say that Nigeria would rank poorly when it comes to infrastructure, right? Infrastructure development. Again, what I have here is sort of a chart of areas where we have seen public-private participation in projects, right? A good number of these projects, or all of these projects represented on this graph, essentially has government entities and private sector players participating now. The Nigerian government has also realized that to be able to bridge this gap, right, you require the intervention of private investors. The government certainly would not be able to do all of this on its own. We are involved in a couple of, to some extent, in some of these projects. I take, for instance, Lagos Red Line Metro. I also know that the Chinese railway company is constructing the railroads and the tracks, and we're particularly involved in the financing for that aspect of the work. But we're also involved in the entire the concessioning process. again, the Apapa Container Terminal concession, it's something that we were deeply involved with, and a couple of others that are not even represented on this chart. So the other thing you will see is that this cuts across different sectors of the Nigerian economy. So from the airport to seaports to waste recycling to power plants and things of the sort, right? Recycling plants and all of that. So as of today, a number of models, PPP models have been adopted by the ICRC, and with MDAs or development agencies when it comes to implementing PPP. So you could have management contracts where the particular MDA enters into some sort of relationship with a private entity to be able to manage a public infrastructure. In other cases, you would find some sort of lease contract, right, where the private entity is put in that place. I'll give you an example. We have a client today who is in such a venture, such a relationship with the Nigerian government, with an agency of government, where it leases a structure, but uses that structure to manage port traffic, right? And then you could have concessions where, for a several number of years, the government gives, a private entity the right to carry on activities in a particular space. They pay royalty to the government, and then, for those number of years, they continue to manage that public facility, right? You could also have build, operate, and transfer arrangements, right? So you could have roads where a private entity, apologies, please, private entities, are allowed to construct the public, develop the public project, and then receive, payments, say toll from such project, and thereafter hand over that project over to the government. So usually for 10, 15, or even 20 years. We've seen something of the sort coming up, especially with the rail transport system, right? In terms of the processes for PPP in Nigeria, so the project will typically start as a development, right? The private investor develops the project, he identifies a particular need or a particular situation. So let's take, for instance, that you have traffic gridlock in a particular area, and then the private investor is saying, look, we're able to deploy a solution to manage this situation. Or we could even say, look, we know this stretch of road is very bad, but this road can be fixed with private money, and then revenue can be generated from it to repay whatever it is that was invested and then handed over to the government. So that's development of the project, right? A business case is made for it and submitted to that development agency or that government agency. And then the procurement process, which is also a very integral part of the process of PPP, also comes to play, right? So a project team is set up, a management structure is put in place, an info memo, and bid documents. So typically, once it is identified, the government will then have to, go through a procurement process, right, to ensure, and again, the whole idea of the procurement process is to ensure fairness, so that no one, the project is not overly priced, to the detriment of the public interest, right? And then all of that, the competitive process, bid process is, you go through that process, and then that government entity is able to now approve the full business case for such a project, right? And then we go on to the stage of implementation. So if it's going to be a construction, that construction is done. If it's going to be the private entity coming into place, to begin to manage that situation, bringing in its equipment and all of that. That process is done. And during this period, there's always an obligation on that government entity to monitor the design and the construction of that project to ensure that it meets the specifications that have been agreed prior to implementation. And then there's the point of maturity, right? When the project is all done, right? And in the case of a BOT, for instance, the private investor has, stayed its course, has stayed, carried on the project for the period in the agreement, the parties have agreed, to carry on that project. Yeah. Now, at this point, the government entity wants to be sure that what is being handed over to it is good enough for the continuation of its operations. If there's going to be any payments made at this point, all of those payments are made, payments are set off, and then the contract closes. Yeah. So this is usually the life cycle of PPPs. In terms of the regulatory framework, the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission Act, apologies, this should be 2005. That act sets up or establishes the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission. Now, as we'll see in the next slide, this commission bears the responsibility of managing PPPs entered into by the federal government. Now, if you realize, I'm choosing my words carefully because I had mentioned early on that Lagos state government, which I know of a couple of PPPs entered into between Chinese companies or Chinese government-backed companies and Lagos state government. Now, the regime applicable to that is not the ICRCA, or the legislation applicable to that is not the ICRCA, but the public-private participation law of Lagos State. In fact, I know that another version of that law was passed in 2021, right? There are dissimilarities between what obtains under that regime and what we have under the ICRCA, but again, I guess that conversation is for another occasion. There's also the PPCA, which is the privatization, not very sure what the acronym stands for, but again, the whole idea of it is this law was the basis upon which most of the assets that were privatized after Nigeria returned, to democratic rule in 1999. This was the law that formed the basis for most of those privatization and commercialization. And I think it was relevant law that applied to the Bureau of Public Enterprise, right? Yeah, so we also have the Public Procurement Act. Now, if you recall, I had mentioned that the ICRC will typically go through a procurement process for the purpose of approving a PPP transaction. Now, the provisions of the Public Procurement Law, or Act rather, ensures, sets out the standards and modalities for the procurement process. And I believe these days it's usually followed strictly because of the sanctions that could arise from not complying with that law. And then there's the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007 also. The act also ensures that government is accountable and prudent in its budget preparation and execution or implementation. So you could have PPP arrangements where government has to sort of contribute to the let's say that a JV, a joint venture, is set up and government has to contribute. All of those things would have to pass through the Ministry of Finance and the requirements of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Yep. Now, I'll just speak briefly to the relevant key provisions of the ICRC, which any potential PPP investor at the federal level should take into consideration, right? Oh, apologies. Okay, the ICRC at a glance. So in terms of the functions of the commission, part of what it does is to take custody of concession agreements that are made under the Act and monitor compliance with terms and conditions of such agreements. This is critical because I've had an experience where, for some reason, an investor had come in, entered into a PPP arrangement with a government agency, but did not even bother with the ICRC, right? It was almost 2 or 3 years into the concession that they realized that apart from the reporting, requirements, the reporting they should do to the ICRC, they had not made good the, fee payments that they had entered into with the fee structure that they had entered into with the government agency, right? Now, it was a difficult situation for them because they now had to rework the concession agreement they entered into with the government agency to now reflect the reality of the payments that should have been made to the ICRC. Now, it wasn't really a funny situation because adjustments had to be made in terms of projections, in terms of the number of years for the project and things of the sort. So again, it's really important to be able to, reach out to the ICRC and get them involved in the concession, in the PPP process. Part of their job is also to ensure efficient execution of any concession agreement or contracts entered into by the government, right? Another thing they will typically do is to, carry out other duties that the president may assign to them. So this is sort of an omnibus provision that allows them to do a bit more than what exactly they have listed in the Act. Again, one should be aware that when you enter into this concession agreement, be sure that it's insured. And in terms of the insurance, especially where it involves, assets that belong to the government. So let's say, for instance, you're responsible for a government building, a public facility. It's required that such assets are insured. Another issue that came up was the question of, so who bears the cost of the insurance? Should it be from the revenue of the company, or should it be from the profits made by the company? Now, the ICRC at the time had argued, look, it's from your profits, right? But again, we're able to get around such conversations. But again, what is important is that the insurance company will be one that is approved by the National Insurance Commission. Typically, this would be a Nigerian insurance company. Yeah. Okay. So there is also the issue of guarantees. Now, in the next slide, which incident unfortunately is up, we had mentioned that it is actually possible for governments to give guarantees. Part of the responsibility of government when it comes to PPP is to ensure the bankability of the project. Because again, the private investor is likely to seek funding or financing from third parties, right? Investors, debt providers, lenders, right? And they need to be sure that the project will be able to pay for itself. And that even when they provide security to backstop the loan, they have the guarantee of the government that this loan will be repaid. But here's the catch. Under the ICRC Act, before such a guarantee will be provided, it has to be approved by the Federal Executive Council. Now, it's not enough. Again, these are the nuances, that comes to drafting concession agreements. We've done a good number of them, and it's absolutely clear to us that, look, to get to that point where you're able to say that I have a guarantee from the government, that guarantee must be coming or must come only after it has been approved by the Federal Executive Council. So part of the CPs, one of the conditions precedent to entering into such a transaction will be that, look, the Federal Executive Council has approved that a guarantee will be provided by the Nigerian government. Yeah. Now, again, part of what the commission does is to exercise supervisory jurisdiction over PPP projects. So you would also find that when you're involved in PPP projects, you would have, invitations from the ICRC from time to time. You know, they want to know the status of the project. They want to inspect the project. They want to see sometimes even your books, right? Okay, so in terms of the fees, I would not want to belabor the point, but again, an annual percentage of not more than 2% is charged on the gross revenue that accrues to the concessionaire, right? Again, we had issues on this point, but I wouldn't want to bother with going into all of those details. And then there's that one-off fee of about 5% that is payable to them, right? So in terms of the funding, typical debt financing, equity financing, or government funding. The debt financing could come by way of loans, structured as term loans, or even project finance facilities, so that the project gets to pay for itself. You know. And then, again, here's the point I had mentioned about the bankability of the project. About the bankability of the project. Now, in terms of equity financing, this comes to the structuring of the project. So typically when foreign investors, you know, want to enter into PPP arrangements with the government, they set up an SPV that would be the project company. And then they have their own entity as the sponsor of the project company, right? Again, I wouldn't want to go into details of how this is valuable, you know, and how it makes you debt proof and all that. But the point is that's a structure. Equity financing, but the snag with that is, look, as an investor in that situation, you certainly have to wait until the project becomes profitable to be able to earn your return on investment on the project. Now, the CBN also have its infrastructure finance, which is structured as a loan. I know that there's one which is currently live, and I think that, you know, the CBN lends gives, you know, the facilities to the bank, and the bank on lends to potential investors in infrastructure space. I believe that the CBN lends to the banks at 1%, and then the banks lend at 7% or thereabout. I'm not very sure what the figures are right now. There's also the CBN, again, depending on the nature of the project, could allow commercial banks access their differentiated cash reserve requirement facility. Now, the differentiated cash reserve requirement facility, or the cash reserve, is that amount that commercial banks will typically leave with the central bank. Now, in deserving circumstances, especially for infrastructure projects, the CBN is allowed, may allow commercial, the CBN may allow commercial banks to provide facilities to investors, right, who would want to invest in infrastructure projects, right? We had one situation like that, but in that case, the loan was given to a state government, right, as its own contribution to the project that is being carried out. The interest rate, again, for that is typically concessionary. Now, in terms of dispute resolution for PPP-related disputes, a number of dispute resolution mechanisms will come to play. There could be the mediation and conciliation, or even negotiation, where the agency of government, and again, and I'll say this clearly, that usually we find that this comes up a bit more frequently in Nigeria, where for some reason the MDAs or the government agencies may not necessarily, as the project goes on, may not be in agreement with the private investor, right? And we've had to participate in such sessions where we represented or acted on behalf of the private investor. In some cases, in one of such situations, we had to go all the way to the ICRC, who would be inviting our client, or who had invited our client, and the development agency. You could also have, that's exactly what I refer to here as a recourse to sector regulator. In that case, the regulator is the ICRC and the development agency, the state agency. We both had to report to the sector regulator for their intervention. And then you could also have panel of experts as arbitrators. Many times, some of these things are provided for in the concession agreement, how you want your disputes to be resolved. I think that's the important point to be made. The Nigerian judicial system also provides an opportunity for dispute resolution. Now, many people would argue that resorting to the Nigerian judicial system or legal system could take quite some time, because typically the dockets of the court are full and things of the sort. The other option will be to, have international arbitration embedded in that in the concession agreement as the basis upon which disputes may be resolved. Right. Again, it may be an ad hoc arbitration. It may be, an institutional arbitration. And the number of arbitrators will usually range from 1 to 3 or even 5, depending on what the size of the dispute, right? And so what you find in that situation really is that parties will usually resort to it as the last option if all else fails. Because again, we all know that arbitration can be quite expensive. And of course, it's efficient because it takes less time to resolve or settle, but then it can be quite expensive. Okay, I think I will stop here. And I guess we can now proceed to questions. Edwin?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Safa, for your sharing about the PPP. I think this is mostly interested topic by the attendees. I think we have a question from. We can take a question from the audience. The first question about the renewable as Tinado, you can say from the chat function. So the question is, any opportunities for large-scale solar, such as solar, wind, IPPs, especially over 50 megawatts?
Thank you, Edwin. I'll take the question on two legs. I'll say yes and no. From a yes perspective, I'd mentioned during my presentation that the government, through the MBES, the bulk trade has signed 14 PPAs. Or those PPAs are currently, they've not reached financial close. So for some companies, rather than look at developing new projects, one of the ways is to approach those existing companies with the PPAs to see how you can structure the current project or the financing requirements in order to meet financial close and to make the project bankable. That's one structure you can look at. So that's an opportunity. Also, rather than develop one large-scale project of 50 megawatts, we've seen companies provide different projects for commercial and industrial clients between 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts. And I spoke about an ongoing project we advised on. Now, the good thing about such structure is you advise different clients and you pitch those projects to them. For example, it drastically reduces their OPEX costs, the cost they spend in generating electricity. For example, for a solar project or a wind project, there's obviously no you don't need gas, you don't need diesel, so that cost element is reduced or completely eliminated. So rather than one massive 50 megawatts project that you want to connect to the grid, you have different projects for different clients, and you, number one, don't need to connect that to the grid. And depending on the capacity that the client requires and how you structure the project, in certain cases you actually don't need to get a license from the regulator. And from a credit risk perspective, you know that you're dealing with bankable commercial and industrial clients. And I'd mentioned one of the key issues with the power sector in Nigeria is the low tariff cost. The fact that they said the tariff is quite low, and so, but with negotiating a corporate PPA with a commercial client or a industrial client, you know that you're going to earn your return on investment. Now, from a no perspective, obviously the government is not looking to sign any new PPA for the development of an on-grid solar facility. We have 14 solar PPAs currently sitting. They've not done anything about that. So the government is not looking to do that. And even if the government is looking to develop new power plants to plug into the on-grid space, it's not something they're looking to do within the next few years. But interestingly, there's a new structure, and I should mention that the federal government deployed recently, 2021, for a renewable energy project, but for a solar project, but it was for 10 megawatts. So what the government did was to collaborate with the state government and the local government to develop a 10 megawatt solar power plant for a particular community using a special purpose vehicle. Now, the funding obligation, obviously, it's not on the federal government, although the federal government provided funds, but the federal government will not provide a guarantee. Based on the study they carried out, obviously, the residents of that community had the financial capacity, the businesses there to pay for energy generated and energy utilized. So using a special purpose vehicle, the federal government, the Kano state government, and the local government in Kano state, they created and developed a 10 megawatt project for provision of electricity. So those are the different structures you can use to assess different opportunities in the renewable energy space, rather than look to develop a massive 10 megawatts solar or wind power project.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tinato, for your clarification. I think I have a question for the about the mining, Amalola. You mentioned the regulators and then the agency that in charge of the mining sector in Nigeria. So I just wonder that if foreign investor want to do a mining project there, does the foreign investor need to sign mining convention with the local government or with the federal government to cover all the aspects such as the tax and then the labor and etc. and land, gas. So is there a mining convention need to be signed in Nigeria for mining project?
Okay. Okay, yes, thank you, Edwin. So please let me get your question. You're asking if there is a document, it's something to be signed with the Nigerian government. Can you just repeat that question? Because I'm not sure I got it very well.
I mean, for example, in the other African countries, yes. For example, in DRC, if the foreign investor want to invest into a mine, they need to sign a mining agreement or mining convention with the government to stipulate all the things about the investment, such as the tax and the labor and then visa and then the export and import, so such kind of things. So in Nigeria, is there some such kind of mining agreement need to be signed with the federal or local government in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you. I get it now. So in Nigeria, we actually do not have such an arrangement. So what is allowed is you can come into Nigeria. If you need to gather data, go to the necessary agency for the purposes of getting and sourcing geoscientific data. But there is actually no mining contract or arrangement that you enter into directly with the Nigerian government. So it's not the same thing in Nigeria.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Just to add, that's one of the interesting things about the mining space in Nigeria, because I know during the course of the presentation, Mola mentioned that you can own your company 100%.
Yeah,
That's foreign, 100% foreign ownership. So you come in, you can apply for relevant mining licenses and run your business using a private company in Nigeria, provided you satisfy all the regulatory requirements. So that's the good thing and interesting thing about the mining space in Nigeria. It's open to everyone, local investors and foreign investors, and the government would not interfere.
Sorry,
okay,
maybe you just want to reference the licensing.
Yes, yes, you have to obtain a license, provided you comply with regulatory requirements, which includes licensing. You own your company 100%, and then you run it.
Okay, another question about the mining tool is about the lithium, the mineral which will be used for the battery in the EV. This Chinese company want to invest in a lithium mine in Nigeria. So is there a kind of risks or challenges for such kind of investment?
Well, I'm not aware of any of such, but I'm not sure. Kema, do you have an idea?
No, so there are no restrictions from lithium mining. It's just like other minerals. You can obviously come into the market, get your license, and search for lithium. And for example, we have a client that is obviously looking at that space, given the importance of lithium mining to the EV industry. And we had conversations with the regulator, the Mining Cadastral Office, and provided you apply, you meet the necessary regulatory requirements, you obtain your license, you meet the necessary environmental requirements, obviously, you meet the necessary community development requirements. Obviously, you need to interact with the community. There's nothing stopping you from obviously going into that space.
Okay, great.
I should mention, sorry, that recently the government announced that it's discovered a massive deposit of lithium in Nigeria. So you have a lot of companies certainly looking at lithium mining in Nigeria.
So it's possible for Nigeria government to list lithium as a strategic mineral, which may be restricted to first restricted to be invested by foreign investors, and the second, even though it is allowed to be invested by foreign investors, but the export of such mineral will be restricted. Do you think it is possible in the future?
So if I understand your question correctly, whether Nigeria government will in the future restrict foreign investors from going into the lithium mining space? Obviously, it's difficult to speculate on what the government will do or not do. Well, currently, and I would, my colleague had mentioned that the constitution in Nigeria obviously guarantees investors against expropriation. Number two, the Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission Act obviously again encourages foreign investors to come into the Nigerian market. And the government obviously has a posture of encouraging investors to come into the market. The Mining Act provides for different incentives, which number one includes the 100% foreign ownership. So the government's posture at this time is to encourage investors to come into the market. And I would say the possibility of the government restricting investors from going into lithium mining space is very minimal. It's say 0 to 5.
Okay. Also, you just to add to what Kema said, you have to bear in mind the government's policies and intention around mining. So the real intention is to ensure growth in that sector. The fact that the government is looking to diversify from oil and gas. So, for the government to put any form of restriction would be defeating the whole purpose of regulating that industry and providing enabling environment to allow investors to come into the country.
Okay, thank you. I think the next question would be to Jimmy about the PPP. Because I just read a news, I think it's yesterday or the day before yesterday. It's about a kind of agreement signed between Nigeria government and a consortium, including a Chinese company and the AFC. The contract is about to modernize the customs of Nigeria. It's e-customs of Nigeria, something like that. But this contract was challenged before the court in Nigeria. So the court gave order, the government should not sign this contract with this consortium, including a Chinese company. In such case, if it is a PPP project, so how the foreign investor or the private investor can handle this kind of dispute, first with the government, and the second, the challenge from the court. Even though the government will perform the contract, will sign the contract, but the challenge from the court will make the contract invalid. So how the investor should handle this situation?
Okay. So what I would say, first of all, is that I'm not sure the exact grounds on which the contract was challenged, but I think what's more important is if the parties conform to the framework, the regulatory framework. So I'll give you an example. So we've been involved in a PPP project where we were invited by one of the state governments to advise them. And we came in, they had already selected a concessionaire. And one of the things we had to do was conduct due diligence on the project itself. And one of the first questions we then asked them was that, did they follow the bidding process to make sure that they selected the concessionaire? And why we raised that, or what we said to them was that, look, this is important because we don't want someone to challenge the project, months or years down the line, and to say that, look, the state government didn't follow the due process in selecting the concessionaire. So in this case that you have raised, it's possible that maybe they didn't quite follow the process.
Yeah, I think this challenge was raised to the court by the other two bidders. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's your point.
So you see, if they can then show that they followed the due process, the regulatory framework, then at the end of the day, the case will be dismissed. The only problem, of course, is that it then takes time because all the parties would have to wait for the final judgment. Because if it's the judgment comes at the first the court of first instance, it's likely that the judgment will be appealed. So all this will take time. So the parties will just have to be patient. But ultimately, if they follow the process, then all should be well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jimmy. So I think the last question to Chinado. So it's you mentioned the PPA in your presentation, especially the last case in your presentation is about the I think it's a C&I project. So commercial and industrial solar project. So in that project, so the PPA, I think, will be a corporate PPA. So the PPA will be signed between the PPA investor and the user or the end user, maybe a facility or a commercial building, something like that. So what's the key risks for such corporate PPA in Nigeria?
Yes, correct, Edwin. It's a corporate PPA, and obviously one risk is the credit risk. That's a major issue. The credit risk is a major issue, and I know I went on and on about the currency mismatch risk, the foreign exchange risk. That's something you have to pay attention to. That's the regulatory risk, but you can structure your project to address that regulatory risk. So those are three key risk or issues that project developers have to pay attention to. And there are ways of mitigating it. But the credit risk, obviously, you can ask for a bank guarantee, say 3 months bank guarantee renewable by the company to address that. And you can conduct your credit due diligence to ensure that the company has the credit capacity to meet their payment obligations. From a foreign currency risk, I gave instances of structuring issues. You can utilize O&M, local O&M and EPC contractors and pay in Naira. You can obviously buy FX forwards also. So depending on how you want to address that currency risk.
Additional question for this is the price of this carbon PPA is what kind of system regime? I mean, is it a fixed price? The tariff is fixed, or the tariff is floating? I mean, is it a kind of contract of difference or the other?
So again, for a project developer, it's better for you to, number one, it's a contract. You can, depending on what you agree with your counterparty, you can agree on the pricing requirements. You can go with fixed, you can go with floating, you can do pay as you go, you can do take or pay as you want. So it's really a negotiation, because it's a corporate PPA, a negotiation between the project developer and the customer. But given the fact that you're borrowing to finance the project, especially if it's a project financed by commercial banks, you want to lock in a long-term PPA with a take or pay clause. And obviously, even if the customer fails to take the electricity generated, you'd be paid. And remember, this is a solar project. It's intermittent, although you have storage, but it's really intermittent. You need the customer to, as you generate, utilize the energy generated.
Okay, great. Thanks, Antonado. I think we're closing our webinar today. I think we already ran out of time. Kemi, are you there? Do you want to speak a few words?
I am here.
Hi, Kemi.
Yeah, yes, good to see you. Thank you very much, everybody. And I think, everything that needs to be said has been said. The opportunities in Nigeria, definitely great. We've spoken about the mining sector. We've spoken about renewables today. We've also spoken about the way in which investors can participate, and that is extremely important. There's a huge deficit in terms of infrastructure in Nigeria. So there's great opportunity, abundant opportunity for investors in Nigeria. We have many Chinese companies that are working in different sectors of the Nigerian economy. And I believe there is more room given the deficits that we have in the different areas. So everybody's welcome, and thank you to everybody for attending. Edwin?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kemi. I think this is today's webinar, and thank you all the attendees for your time. And we are sharing our presentation after the webinar. So we are going to organize the third one, I think, in July. We will hope that all of you will participate. We were sharing about how to finance the project in Nigeria. Okay, and that's all for today. Thank you, our colleagues in Nigeria, for your effort, for support.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Have a nice day there.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Okay.